Great civilizations have vanished in the blink of an eye. This video uncovers the chilling evidence of when empires fell overnight, revealing the sudden global upheavals that reshaped our world. You will gain a powerful new lens for understanding the hidden vulnerabilities in our own society. We will explore how a single day could erase a mighty empire and what mysterious forces can topple giants without warning. What do you believe is the greatest threat to our modern way of life? A mighty tower can stand for centuries, yet fall in a single, deafening moment. This is the nature of sudden collapse, the terrifyingly rapid disintegration of a complex society. It is not a slow fading, but a swift unraveling, where internal weaknesses and external shocks converge to overwhelm a civilization's intricate systems. Historian Joseph Tainter presents a compelling theory, suggesting that the very complexity an empire builds for its success can become its greatest liability. As systems grow more elaborate, they demand more energy and resources to maintain. When a crisis hits, this complex structure cannot adapt quickly enough. It buckles. The collapse is rarely just a military defeat. It is an economic shattering, with trade routes dissolving and currencies becoming worthless. It is an environmental catastrophe, with famine and drought gripping the population. It is a social implosion where the shared identity and trust that held the society together simply vanish. We see the evidence in a sudden loss of central authority, where no one is left to give orders. We find it in the abrupt breakdown of long-distance trade networks, where vital goods no longer arrive. And we detect it as a profound cultural discontinuity, where writing, art, and technology are lost, leaving only scattered fragments for future archaeologists to ponder. Consider the cataclysm at the end of the Bronze Age, around 1200 BCE. Across the Mediterranean and Near East, mighty empires like the Hittites and the Mycenaeans disintegrated nearly simultaneously. Grand palaces were burned and abandoned, intricate writing systems were forgotten, and entire regions plummeted into a dark age. What could possibly trigger such a widespread cascade of failure? To answer that, we must search for the fingerprints of catastrophe left behind in the dust. The grand palaces of the Bronze Age did not just fade away. They were silenced. Around 1200 BCE, the bustling centers of power from Greece to Anatolia and the Levant were violently extinguished. At Hattusa, the imposing capital of the Hittite Empire, archaeologists found a city deliberately burned and abandoned. At the wealthy port of Ugarit, a frantic letter was found, left unsent, pleading for help that would never come. This was not an isolated tragedy, but a coordinated crash, a systems failure on a continental scale. The intricate network of trade that supplied tin for bronze and luxuries for elites shattered. Specialized skills, including the complex linear B script of the Mycenaeans, were utterly forgotten, plunging the region into a centuries-long dark age. What force could be powerful enough to achieve this? The evidence points not to a single villain, but a cascade of calamities. Paleoclimatologists have uncovered data pointing to severe, prolonged droughts that would have decimated harvests, leading to famine and social unrest. This environmental stress likely fueled mass migrations, groups of desperate people on the move. Into this volatile picture sail the so-called Sea Peoples, a mysterious confederation of raiders mentioned in Egyptian inscriptions. They were likely both a symptom and a cause, a wave of disruption that overwhelmed already fragile kingdoms. As archaeologist Eric Cline describes it, the collapse was a perfect storm. No single disaster could have toppled these empires. It was the combination of climate change, internal rebellion, and external invasion that fractured their complex societies. Their deep interdependence became their downfall, as the failure of one kingdom pulled down its trading partners in a domino effect of collapse. This ancient catastrophe holds up a stark mirror to our own world. We too live in an age of profound global interconnection, where a disruption in one corner of the globe can trigger economic and social shocks everywhere. How resilient are we to a similar convergence of crises? The silence that fell over the Bronze Age invites us to listen carefully to the echoes in our own time. Centuries later, a similar silence fell over the lush jungles of Central America. The Maya classic collapse presents a hauntingly familiar pattern of overnight disintegration. By the 9th century CE, magnificent city-states like Tikal and Palenque were at their peak, their stone pyramids piercing the canopy. Then, with startling speed, they were abandoned. The grand plazas, once bustling with life, were reclaimed by the jungle. Stelae, the stone monuments recording the deeds of kings, were left unfinished. The population plummeted, leaving the great urban centers as ghostly echoes of their former glory. Archaeologists have pieced together a story of a civilization pushed past its breaking point. Sediment cores from nearby lakes tell a tale of relentless drought, a prolonged period of aridity that would have devastated maize agriculture, the very foundation of Maya society. At the same time, the political landscape grew increasingly volatile. Inscriptions on surviving monuments speak of escalating warfare between rival city-states, a frantic competition for dwindling resources and prestige. Scholar Richardson Gill powerfully argues that it was this convergence of climate change and human conflict that created a fatal tipping point. The elaborate system of Maya kingship, which tied the ruler's divine authority to the arrival of rains and abundant harvests, was fundamentally undermined by the endless drought. As crops failed, faith in the elite crumbled. The intricate network of trade and tribute that bound the cities together fractured. This was not a single event, but a cascading failure. One city's struggle became its neighbor's crisis, creating a domino effect of collapse across the entire lowlands. The Maya experience forces us to ask a difficult question. How resilient is any society when the environmental conditions that fostered its rise begin to dramatically shift? Their story is a profound lesson in the limits of adaptation, revealing how internal strife can be dangerously amplified by external ecological pressures. The silence that swallowed the Maya cities finds a chilling parallel in the dust of ancient Mesopotamia. Here, the very first empire in human history, the Akkadian Empire, met a similarly abrupt end. For centuries, the Akkadians had mastered the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, unifying city-states under a single, powerful ruler and pioneering administrative systems that would be emulated for millennia. Then, around 2150 BCE, this formidable power disintegrated. Archaeological sites reveal not the ruins of war, but the quiet evidence of abandonment. Major cities were simply left to the desert, and settlement patterns shifted dramatically as populations scattered. What could dismantle such a foundational pillar of civilization? The answer appears to be written not in stone, but in ancient ice. Climate scientists drilling into polar ice cores and analyzing sediment layers have uncovered the signature of a catastrophic event. They point to a prolonged and severe megadrought, a period of extreme aridification known as the 4.2 kiloyear event. This was not a few dry seasons, but a climatic shift that stretched for decades, perhaps even centuries. For an empire built on grain and agriculture, it was a death sentence. Crops withered in the fields, irrigation canals ran dry, and the famine that followed would have shattered the social contract. Historians like Harvey Weiss argue that this environmental catastrophe was the primary trigger for the collapse. The very innovation that defined the Akkadian Empire, its complex, centralized administration, became a liability. When the rains failed, the state's ability to collect taxes and distribute food from its granaries collapsed under the strain. The system was designed for control and surplus, not for resilience in the face of a prolonged, unforeseen crisis. The Akkadian case is a stark lesson in foundational vulnerability. It shows us that even the most brilliant human systems are ultimately dependent on the stability of the natural world. This forces us to reflect on a delicate balance all societies must strike. How do we foster the innovation that drives progress, while simultaneously building the resilience needed to withstand the unpredictable shocks that history inevitably delivers? The story of the First Empire warns us that one cannot truly succeed without the other. The slow decay of the Akkadian Empire finds a thunderous echo in the fate of its distant successor, Rome. By the 5th century CE, the western half of the Roman Empire was a shadow of its former self, its disintegration accelerating into a rapid unraveling. This was not a single event like the fall of a city, but a systemic collapse that played out over a few tumultuous decades. The symbolic blow came in 410 CE, when the Visigoths, a people once considered barbarians, breached the walls and sacked the city of Rome itself. For the first time in 800 years, the Eternal City had been violated, sending a psychic shockwave across the entire civilized world. The evidence of this breakdown is scattered everywhere. Archaeologists unearth buried hoards of coins, hidden by terrified citizens who never returned to reclaim their wealth. Across the countryside, lavish villas were simply abandoned, their intricate mosaic floors left to be covered by soil. Historical accounts from the time paint a picture of a perfect storm. Chroniclers described vast migrations of Germanic tribes pressing against the frontiers, while from the east came the terrifying, seemingly unstoppable Huns, pushing other groups before them like a wave. Scholar Peter Heather powerfully argues that these external pressures were catastrophic, but they fell upon an empire already hollowed out from within. Rome was suffering from crippling economic inflation, its currency devalued to near worthlessness. Its military was stretched impossibly thin, trying to defend a vast border with dwindling resources and loyalty. The empire's immense complexity, once its greatest strength, had become a fatal burden. The political center could no longer control the periphery, and local generals and governors began to act like independent warlords. This collapse demonstrates with brutal clarity how long-term structural weaknesses, left unaddressed, can culminate in a sudden and irreversible loss of control when acute crises converge. The Roman example forces us to confront difficult questions about the sustainability of expansion and the immense cost of maintaining vast territories. How does an empire know when it has grown too large to manage? What parallels can we see between the pressure on Rome's borders and the geopolitical tensions that define our world today? The role of external invaders in this story is undeniable, yet they were often the final push that toppled a structure already rotten at its foundations. These waves of people moving across the map are rarely a simple story of conquest. They are often a desperate response to a changing world, a force that exposes the brittle foundations of the empires they encounter. The arrival of the Sea Peoples or the Gothic tribes was not merely an attack, it was a symptom of a wider systemic failure, a pressure release for regions that could no longer sustain their populations. Historians like Brian Ward Perkins observe that these migrations act as a brutal stress test, revealing every crack in an empire's military readiness and logistical framework. When the Roman legions could no longer effectively patrol the Danube or the Rhine, It was not just a military failure, it was an invitation for movement. The empire's vast infrastructure, its roads and supply lines originally built for control, suddenly became highways for its own destabilization. Consider the sheer velocity of the Mongol invasions in the 13th century. The Khwarezmian Shoddam was a powerful and sophisticated empire, yet it was dismantled with breathtaking speed. This was not a slow war of attrition. It was a strategic shock, a series of precise, overwhelming blows that shattered the Shoddam's command structure and its will to resist. The Mongols did not necessarily set out to erase a civilization, but their methods of warfare, designed to create terror and submission, inevitably led to the collapse of civic order. Trade routes were severed, agricultural lands were laid waste, and the complex social fabric that held the empire together simply unraveled. The invaders moved on, but the society they left behind was often incapable of reassembling itself. This forces a difficult but essential question. How can any society prepare for the unpredictable shock of large-scale population movements? The historical record suggests that the most resilient empires were those with flexible borders and a capacity for integration, absorbing new peoples and turning potential threats into sources of strength. The ones that fell were often the most rigid, those that had grown so dependent on a fixed way of life that any disruption became catastrophic. The movement of people, whether driven by hunger, fear, or ambition, has always been a fundamental force in human history. It reminds us that no wall is ever high enough, and no border is ever truly closed against the tides of change. While these external pressures can deliver the final, shattering blow, the true weakness almost always begins within, in the silent decay of the institutions and beliefs that bind a civilization together. A civilization can appear unshakable on the surface while its core is quietly consumed from within. This internal decay, a slow rot of corruption and inequality, often does more to doom an empire than any invading army. It is the silent partner to every sudden collapse, patiently weakening the foundations until the entire structure is ready to fall. In the later Roman Empire, this process was starkly visible. Rampant inflation had rendered the currency nearly worthless, a problem so severe the government would repeatedly slash the silver content of coins, hoping no one would notice. This was more than an economic crisis, it was a profound breach of public trust. At the same time, the political elite became consumed by bitter infighting, prioritizing personal power and wealth over the stability of the state itself. The immense bureaucracy, once the engine of imperial administration, grew bloated and inefficient, strangling innovation and responsiveness. Historian Edward Gibbon famously pointed to this loss of civic virtue as a primary cause of the fall. When the people and their leaders no longer believe in the shared project of their civilization, its resilience evaporates. This decay manifests in tangible ways you can almost see and feel. Imagine road systems crumbling from neglect, the vital arteries of trade and communication slowly closing. Picture an unfair tax system that burdens the many while the wealthy few find loopholes, creating a deep, simmering resentment between the ruling class and the populace. This disconnect is fatal. When a crisis finally arrives, whether a drought, an invasion, or a plague, a healthy society can pull together. A corrupt and divided one cannot. The mechanisms for collective action are broken, the trust needed for sacrifice is gone, and the resources have been squandered or hoarded by a privileged few. The empire is left with no capacity to recover. This forces a deeply relevant question for our own time. How do we recognize these internal vulnerabilities in our modern societies before they reach a critical point? Are there warning signs in our own institutions, in the gap between the powerful and the powerless, or in the health of the public infrastructure we all depend on. The silent rot of internal decay teaches us that the most dangerous threats are often the ones we cannot see from outside the walls, the slow leaks that eventually sink the ship. This internal fragility, however, makes a society exquisitely vulnerable to the next great force of collapse, one that has repeatedly pushed teetering empires over the edge. The silent rot of internal decay makes a society brittle, but it is often the raw power of nature that delivers the final, shattering blow. Environmental triggers have repeatedly acted as the great reset button of history, overwhelming civilizations that believed they were masters of their domain. A prolonged drought, a volcanic eruption that darkens the sky, a sudden shift in global climate, these are not mere background events. They are active forces that can erase an empire's prosperity overnight. The evidence for this is locked in the very fabric of our planet. Scientists reading the annual rings of ancient trees can pinpoint years of extreme stress, while ice cores drilled from glaciers contain tiny bubbles of ancient air, preserving a chemical record of past temperatures and atmospheric chaos. These natural archives tell a story of profound disruption. The Little Ice Age, a period of cooling that gripped Europe from the 14th to the 19th centuries, brought famine, disease, and social unrest, contributing to crises like the Great Famine of 1315 and the 30 Years' War. Closer to our own time, the American Dust Bowl of the 1930s stands as a stark example, where a combination of drought and poor agricultural practices turned fertile plains into a desert, triggering a massive economic and human migration. Scholar Jared Diamond argues that a society's ultimate fate often hinges on its relationship with its environment. He points to the Norse colonies in Greenland, established during a warm period. When the climate cooled again, these Viking settlers stubbornly clung to their European way of life, raising cattle and ignoring the successful hunting techniques of the Inuit people who thrived around them. They failed to adapt and their colonies vanished. The mechanism of collapse is brutally straightforward. A major volcanic eruption, like the massive event in 536 CE, can spew so much ash into the atmosphere that it creates a global volcanic winter. Temperatures plummet, summers fail, and crops wither in the fields. This single environmental shock can set off a devastating chain reaction. Widespread crop failure leads directly to famine, weakening populations and making them vulnerable to disease outbreaks. As resources become desperately scarce, conflict over what little remains becomes inevitable, accelerating a society's decline. This historical pattern forces a critical question for our technologically advanced world. How do we balance our incredible innovation with a fundamental respect for environmental stewardship? Our systems are more complex than ever, but are they truly more resilient to the kind of shocks that have toppled empires before? The answer may lie not just in how we manage our environment, but in how we structure the very lifeblood of our societies, the economic systems that fuel our progress and reveal our deepest vulnerabilities. A bustling trade route is the lifeblood of an empire, and when that artery is severed, the entire body politic begins to starve. Economic collapse rarely arrives with a dramatic battle cry, but with the silent, chilling stillness of a harbor with no ships. It is a swift and merciless unraveling where the flow of essential resources is cut off, market confidence evaporates, and the state finds itself unable to pay its soldiers or feed its people. The intricate web of supply chains that distributes food, raw materials, and information snaps, and the complex society it supported fractures from within. We see this pattern etched into history with startling clarity. During the Mongol conquests, the famed Silk Road, a conduit of wealth and knowledge for centuries, experienced violent disruptions. While the Mongols later revived and protected these routes, their initial invasions shattered the existing economic order, toppling empires like the Khwarezmian Shoddom by severing their commercial ties and paralyzing their administration. Centuries later, the Roman Empire provides a textbook case of internal economic decay. The government, desperate for revenue, repeatedly debased its silver currency, slashing the precious metal content until the coins were nearly worthless. This triggered rampant hyperinflation, a vicious cycle where prices soared and the average citizen's purchasing power evaporated. Imagine a soldier's pay, once enough to support his family, now unable to buy a loaf of bread. This erosion of trust in the very medium of exchange corrodes the social contract, fostering unrest and crippling the state's ability to function. Economist Michael Hudson draws a powerful parallel to our own times, highlighting how unsustainable debt cycles and the depletion of key resources can create a similar fragility. When an economy becomes a pyramid scheme of debt, where new loans are needed just to service old ones, any shock can trigger a cascade of default. The dissolution of the Soviet Union serves as a more recent, poignant example. It was not merely a political breakup but a profound economic failure. The centralized command economy, with its rigid and inefficient supply chains, simply broke down. Store shelves emptied, and the government lost the capacity to fund its vast administrative and military apparatus, leading to a rapid and largely peaceful disintegration. This historical evidence forces a crucial reflection. What are the economic warning signs modern nations must heed? Are we monitoring the health of our critical supply chains, or have we built systems so complex and globalized that a single disruption could cause widespread failure? Is our financial system resilient to debt crises, or are we merely building a higher tower on an unstable foundation? The silence of a deserted marketplace speaks as loudly as the fall of a city wall. Just as economic stability can vanish, so too can the shared beliefs that hold a civilization together, revealing that the most dangerous collapse often begins not in the treasury, but in the human heart. A society's shared beliefs are the invisible mortar holding its walls together. When that mortar crumbles, the entire structure becomes dangerously unstable. This is the power of cultural and ideological shifts, a force that can dissolve the will of a people and make them unwilling to defend the very system they once upheld. It is not an invasion of armies, but an invasion of ideas that often delivers the most decisive blow. The Aztec Empire learned this lesson with brutal finality. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the early 16th century, they did not topple a monolithic power. They stepped into a fractured landscape. The Aztecs ruled over numerous subject peoples who deeply resented their heavy tribute demands and the constant threat of ritual sacrifice. These groups saw the newcomers not just as invaders, but as potential liberators, or at least as a useful tool to break Aztec dominance. The introduction of Christianity, with its profoundly different worldview, further destabilized the existing spiritual order. The collapse was not merely a military defeat, it was a cultural and ideological unraveling where faith in the old gods and the rulers who served them evaporated almost overnight. This phenomenon echoes the theories of scholar Thomas Kuhn, who described how scientific knowledge does not progress smoothly, but through violent paradigm shifts. A long-held model of the universe is suddenly overturned by new evidence, causing a crisis in every institution built upon the old assumptions. The Enlightenment played a similar role for the monarchies of Europe. The radical new idea that power should come from the people, not from a divine right of kings, fundamentally challenged the legitimacy of entire regimes, setting the stage for revolutions that would redraw the map of the world. The mechanism is always the same: When a society's core values are profoundly questioned, public loyalty wanes, people stop believing in the mission, and they withdraw their consent to be governed. Alternative power structures, whether they are new religious movements, political philosophies, or simply local warlords, begin to emerge and fill the vacuum. The central authority loses its moral mandate, and without that, it cannot command the sacrifice and unity needed to survive a crisis. This dynamic forces us to ask a difficult question about our own interconnected world. How does any society maintain its cultural resilience in the face of powerful external influences that constantly bombard it with new ideas and alternative ways of life? The fate of empires suggests that the most dangerous ideological battles are not fought on distant fields, but within the minds of their own citizens. To truly understand how these collapses unfold, we must turn from the realm of ideas to the physical proof, examining the silent testimony left in the ground by those who witnessed the end. The silent testimony of collapsed empires is not found in history books, but buried in the ground. Archaeologists sifting through layers of ash and rubble uncover the chilling, tangible proof of how civilizations end. A single stratum of burnt clay and charcoal, known as a destruction layer, tells a story of a city put to the torch. Abandoned artifacts left where they fell speak of a population that fled in haste. Skeletal remains, often discovered in mass graves, reveal the human cost of famine and conflict. These are not the slow marks of decay, but the stark signatures of a sudden, violent conclusion. To read this story, scientists use powerful tools like radiocarbon dating, which analyzes the decay of carbon in organic materials to assign precise ages to wooden beams or charred seeds. Stratigraphy, the study of soil layers, allows them to place these events in a clear chronological sequence, building a timeline of catastrophe. At the ancient city of Çatalhöyük in Turkey, the evidence points to a rapid abandonment, with homes left filled with everyday objects. At the magnificent temple complex of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, advanced laser mapping has revealed that this vast city was not slowly consumed by the jungle, but was deliberately and systematically depopulated as its water management system failed. Archaeologist James M. Adavasio stresses that these physical finds rarely point to a single cause. Instead, they reveal interconnected patterns of crisis. A mass grave uncovered at a site may indicate a pandemic or a brutal massacre. The sudden construction of flimsy, hastily built fortifications over grand public plazas speaks of a society gripped by fear, turning inward as its central authority crumbled. This hard evidence challenges romantic notions of a peaceful past and forces us to confront the brutal realities of societal failure. What new technologies, from satellite imagery that reveals lost cities to genetic analysis of ancient plague victims, are now revolutionizing our understanding of these ancient upheavals? While the ground holds the physical truth of the collapse, the survivors often leave behind a more haunting record, one written in fear and confusion. The fear and confusion of collapse echo not just in the ruins, but in the frantic words of those who witnessed it. Ancient scribes watching their world disintegrate, often left behind fragmented stories of the end. These written records, etched into cuneiform tablets or penned on medieval parchment, are our most direct line to the human experience of sudden catastrophe. An Egyptian priest's account of the Sea People's attacks describes a force from the sea that left no land untouched, a terrifying and seemingly inexplicable invasion. In the Mayan highlands, glyphs on stone monuments shift from boasting of royal triumphs to detailing a desperate escalation of warfare between city-states, a clear sign of political systems fracturing under strain. Yet these texts are never perfectly objective. They are filled with the biases of their authors, often serving as propaganda to justify a ruler's actions or blame the gods for a leader's failures. The Roman historian Tacitus, for instance, wrote scathing critiques of the emperors whose corruption and incompetence, he argued, paved the way for disaster. Historians like Mary Beard demonstrate the vital work of cross-referencing these ancient texts with the hard evidence from archaeology. By reading a chronicle of famine alongside sediment cores that show prolonged drought, or by matching a boast of military victory with the archaeological reality of a burned city, a far clearer picture of the true crisis emerges. This synthesis often reveals a common thread in these collapses: the critical role of leadership failure. When faced with existential threats, did the ruling class double down on failed policies, or did they adapt and innovate? The written record shows that the answer often determined a civilization's fate. These accounts force us to reflect on a difficult task. How do we separate fact from propaganda in the historical narratives we rely on today? The human responses they document, from panicked flight to remarkable resilience, provide a timeless mirror for our own potential reactions to crisis. This leads us to a pivotal question about the people at the very top. What is the specific role of leadership in either preventing a collapse or, through its own rigidity, hastening the end? A ruler's decisions can either reinforce the walls of a civilization or fatally weaken them. When leadership fails, it often acts as the final catalyst, turning a manageable crisis into an irreversible collapse. History is filled with empires brought down not by a lack of resources, but by a profound failure of judgment at the very top. Envision an empire led by indecisive or corrupt rulers, whose choices accelerate its downfall amid mounting challenges. The final Roman emperors in the West provide a stark case study. As barbarian groups pressed against the frontiers, the imperial court was frequently paralyzed by internal power struggles, unable to formulate a coherent response. They squandered their remaining military strength in civil wars, leaving the actual borders dangerously exposed. This was not just poor strategy, it was a catastrophic misallocation of a dwindling resource, the loyalty of the legions. Similarly, the capture of the Inca Emperor Atahualpa by a tiny band of Spanish conquistadors demonstrates how a single leadership vulnerability can shatter an entire system. The Inca state was so centralized, its power so completely vested in the person of the Sopa Inca, that his seizure created an immediate power vacuum. The complex administrative machine, which directed everything from agriculture to the army, simply froze. Historian Barbara Tuchman famously described such patterns as the march of folly, a clear and avoidable path to disaster that leaders pursue against all evidence and reason. Why do they do this? Often it stems from an inability to adapt. A leader surrounded by sycophants, isolated from the suffering of their people, and wedded to an outdated ideology cannot process new information or changing circumstances. They double down on the strategies that brought them past success, even when those strategies are now leading them straight into ruin. This highlights the core qualities of resilient leadership: adaptability, the ability to build and maintain public trust, and the skill to manage a crisis with clarity and decisiveness. How can societies cultivate leaders who possess these traits, especially in an age of complex global threats? The answer may lie not just in choosing the right individuals, but in building systems that discourage the concentration of unaccountable power and reward practical wisdom over blind loyalty. When the command structure fails, the shockwave radiates outward, leaving the entire population to grapple with a terrifying new reality, a world where every certainty has been stripped away. The ground has fallen away beneath their feet. When an entire civilization disintegrates, the most profound collapse is not of stone and mortar, but of the human spirit. The collective trauma of watching your world vanish creates a psychological rupture that echoes for generations. This is more than fear, it is a fundamental shattering of reality, where every certainty, from the safety of your home to the meaning of your life, is stripped away. The result is often a deep, pervasive anxiety and a terrifying loss of identity. Who are you when the empire that defined your place in the universe is gone? In the power vacuum left by fallen institutions, people can descend into a survivalist apathy, concerned only with the next meal, or they can be galvanized into radical, transformative change. The historical record is a testament to this desperate search for stability. In the dark ages that followed Rome's collapse as civic order crumbled, people across Europe turned overwhelmingly to the one institution that offered a new framework for life, the Christian Church. Monasteries became not just spiritual centers, but repositories of knowledge and islands of order in a sea of chaos. Others took to the roads, joining the great migrations in search of land and a new beginning. This societal retreat is echoed in the work of psychologist Abraham Maslow. His hierarchy of needs suggests that when the foundational layers of safety and security are violently removed, a society, like an individual, cannot focus on higher pursuits like art, philosophy, or complex governance. It must focus purely on survival. This psychological reset can have two very different outcomes. It can lead to a grim simplification, a cultural dark age where knowledge is lost and horizons shrink. Yet, paradoxically, this same process of breaking down can also clear the ground for breathtaking innovation. The Renaissance itself was a rebirth that grew from the fragmented, turbulent soil of the later Middle Ages. The old medieval certainties had been shaken by plague and social upheaval, creating a space for new ideas about human potential and the natural world to finally take root. So how does a community facing such a catastrophe cling to hope? The answer often lies in the small, stubborn acts of preservation, the monks painstakingly copying manuscripts by candlelight, the families maintaining their customs in a distant land, the local leaders organizing a defense for their town. It is in these micro-societies that the seeds of the future are saved. This relentless human capacity to rebuild forces us to ask the ultimate question. If collapse is a recurring pattern, are we doomed to repeat it, or can we learn to recognize the warning signs and chart a different course? Yet history is not just a graveyard of fallen giants. Some civilizations stared into the abyss and stepped back, navigating crises that shattered their neighbors. They are the survivors, the empires that adapted and endured while the world around them fell into ruin. Consider ancient Egypt, a civilization that persisted for nearly 3,000 years. It was not immune to crises, the invasion of the Sea Peoples, periods of famine, and internal strife. Yet it repeatedly recovered, its culture and institutions demonstrating a remarkable resilience. This endurance was built on a foundation of geographic advantage, protected by deserts and nourished by the predictable, life-giving floods of the Nile. But geography was only the beginning. Egypt also maintained strong, centralized institutions, particularly its religious and bureaucratic structures, which provided a stable framework for society even when individual pharaohs were weak. Cultural continuity was another powerful anchor, a shared identity and belief system that held the people together through times of upheaval. Similarly, China, under various dynasties, experienced its own cycles of rise and fall, yet the civilizational core always re-emerged. Scholar Ian Morris points to factors like technological innovation, such as advanced agricultural techniques and early bureaucratic exams, which created an adaptable and merit-based administrative class. Effective governance that could manage large-scale water projects and maintain internal stability was a critical buffer against external shocks. the Byzantine Empire offers a masterclass in strategic adaptation. As the Western Roman Empire crumbled, Constantinople held firm for another 1,000 years. It did so not by clinging blindly to the past, but by transforming itself. It adapted its military, creating the sophisticated theme system that tied land ownership to military service, ensuring a ready defense. It wielded diplomacy with the same skill as its armies, playing rival powers against one another to secure its borders. The common thread among all these survivors is not invulnerability, but flexibility. They learned from past mistakes, diversified their economies beyond a single resource, and maintained institutions that commanded public trust. Their longevity forces a crucial question for our modern world. In our pursuit of efficiency and growth, have we sacrificed the very resilience that allowed these ancient societies to endure? The answer may determine whether we become another cautionary tale or join the ranks of the great survivors. To understand our own predicament, we must finally confront the theories that explain why, when collapse comes, it often arrives with such breathtaking speed. A web of theories attempts to capture the precise moment an empire snaps. These frameworks are not competing ideas, but interconnected strands in a larger net, each helping to explain how a civilization can vanish almost overnight. Systems theory, for instance, views a society not as a monolith, but as a vast, intricate network. Think of it as a city's power grid on a colossal scale. Every institution, every trade route, every social custom is a connection, humming with energy and information. This complexity is a source of great strength, but it also creates profound vulnerability. A shock in one area, like a drought-disrupting agriculture, can cascade through the entire system, overloading its capacity to respond and leading to a catastrophic, system-wide blackout. This is where Joseph Tainter's crucial insight comes into play. He argues that societies inevitably invest in greater complexity to solve their problems, building more bureaucracy, larger armies, and more elaborate infrastructure. For a time, this yields benefits, but eventually they hit a point of diminishing returns. The cost of maintaining this complex edifice becomes so enormous that it drains the society's energy, leaving it brittle and unable to withstand a crisis. The benefits of being part of the empire no longer justify the heavy burdens placed upon its citizens. Resilience theory adds another vital layer to this understanding. It focuses not on the complexity itself, but on a society's adaptive capacity, its ability to absorb shocks, learn, and reorganize. A resilient society can bend without breaking. A fragile one, even if it appears powerful, has lost this flexibility. Its options have narrowed, its institutions have grown rigid, and its leaders are trapped in old ways of thinking. When a new crisis arrives, it has no playbook and no room to maneuver. This convergence of stressors is what mathematicians model through catastrophe theory, which describes how a stable system can be pushed past a tipping point by a relatively small final push. It is not the weight of the last straw that breaks the camel's back, but the camel's already weakened state. Jared Diamond powerfully synthesizes these ideas by focusing on 5 key factors that can erode resilience: environmental damage, climate change, hostile neighbors, the loss of trading partners, and a society's own failure to respond. When these pressures align, they create a perfect storm where the intricate, costly system becomes unsustainable. The empire hits its tipping point and unravels with stunning speed. So how do these abstract models of ancient collapse apply to the intricate, globalized world we inhabit today? The patterns feel hauntingly familiar. Our own world hums with the same vulnerabilities that toppled ancient empires. The echoes of the Bronze Age are unmistakable in our globally connected supply chains, where a single shock in one region can trigger economic tremors everywhere. Historian Yuval Noah Harari reminds us that globalization, for all its benefits, creates a system of immense interdependence. The intricate network that delivers your morning coffee or the components for your computer is not so different from the tin and luxury trade that linked the Hittites and Mycenaeans. It is a web of incredible efficiency, but also of profound fragility, where a pandemic, a major cyber attack, or a conflict over vital resources could cascade into a systemic breakdown with startling speed. We witnessed a stark rehearsal during the COVID-19 pandemic, when lockdowns exposed the brittleness of our just-in-time logistics, leaving store shelves empty and revealing how quickly our daily routines depend on a fragile, uninterrupted flow of goods. This is not a distant theory, it is a recent memory. The same patterns of environmental stress seen in our escalating climate crises mirror the droughts that crippled the Maya and the Akkadians. Our political polarization and loss of faith in institutions recall the internal decay that hollowed out Rome from within. So what lessons can we draw from these ancient collapses to fortify our own future? The answer lies in a conscious shift from mere efficiency to robust resilience. This means building redundant infrastructure, like decentralized energy grids that can withstand localized failures. It demands fostering genuine international cooperation to manage shared threats, from pandemics to climate disruption, rather than retreating into isolated competition. And critically, it requires addressing the deep inequalities that fracture societies, because a united populace is far more resilient than a divided one. The choices we make now in strengthening our social and economic foundations will determine whether we become a cautionary tale for future historians or the authors of a more durable chapter in human history. As we stand at this crossroads, one force holds a uniquely dual role, both as a potential trigger for disaster and as our greatest tool for salvation. Technology can be the very shield that protects a civilization or the hidden flaw that shatters it. This dual role places humanity in a constant balancing act, harnessing innovation for survival while navigating the new perils it creates. The invention of agriculture, for instance, allowed for surplus food and the rise of cities, yet it also tied societies to specific plots of land, making them vulnerable to drought and soil depletion in ways nomadic tribes were not. The internet connects global knowledge and commerce with unparalleled speed, but it also builds a world vulnerable to cascading cyber attacks that could paralyze financial systems and critical infrastructure in an instant. Throughout history, every great technological leap has carried this inherent contradiction. The Industrial Revolution powered the British Empire to global dominance through steam and steel, but it also accelerated the ruthless exploitation of resources and labor, fueling social unrest and setting the stage for unprecedented industrial-scale warfare. Military historian Martin van Creveld illustrates how technological shifts can abruptly rewrite the rules of power. The towering stone castles of feudal lords, once impregnable symbols of control, were rendered obsolete by the widespread use of cannons and gunpowder. A single technological advance could topple an entire military doctrine, and with it the political order it supported. The deeper analysis reveals a consistent pattern. Over-reliance on any complex system creates a single point of failure. Our modern dependence on digital networks is a perfect example. A sophisticated attack on a major cloud service provider or a regional power grid could trigger a domino effect, halting transportation, freezing food supply chains, and collapsing communication in a matter of hours. This forces a critical question for our time. How do we responsibly manage the trade-off between rapid advancement and fundamental security? The pursuit of sustainability through technology, such as advanced renewable energy, is essential, but we must build these systems with redundancy and resilience at their core, learning from empires that became too dependent on their own brilliant inventions. The artifacts these civilizations left behind offer silent, sobering testimony to the moment that balance was lost. A buried coin hoard speaks of a panic its owner did not survive to reverse. These silent objects are the ultimate witnesses to collapse, the everyday items frozen in the moment a society stopped. The Uluburun shipwreck, a vessel that sank off the coast of Turkey around 1300 BCE, is a perfect time capsule of Bronze Age globalization. Its cargo held 10 tons of copper ingots, tin, exotic ebony, and ivory, a snapshot of a thriving, interconnected trade network. The ship was sailing at the very precipice of the era's great collapse, its valuable goods a testament to a system that would soon vanish from the seas. Centuries later, the ruins of Pompeii offer an even more intimate and chilling portrait of a single day's catastrophe. Here, life was not just abandoned, it was preserved in ash, capturing the final, desperate moments of a city going about its business, completely unaware that its world was about to end. These are not just ruins, they are narratives written in stone and metal. Archaeologists unearth weapon caches hidden in city walls, a clear sign of escalating fear and preparation for a siege that ultimately came. They find jars of emergency grain rations, stored but never eaten, telling a story of a crisis that unfolded too quickly for even basic survival plans to be enacted. Perhaps most poignant are the hastily written clay tablets, like the one found at Ugarit, its message a frantic plea for help against an imminent attack, a letter that was never sent because the courier and the kingdom were already gone. As former museum director Neil MacGregor suggests, these objects do more than inform us, they connect us. They transform abstract historical forces into tangible human experiences, allowing us to feel the fear of that scribe and the desperation of the family that buried its savings. The Antikythera mechanism, a complex bronze gearwork device recovered from an ancient Greek shipwreck, stands as a profound symbol of this lost human potential. This astonishingly sophisticated astronomical calculator proves that a level of technological knowledge existed that we never knew about, a brilliance that was swallowed by the subsequent collapse and had to be reinvented centuries later. Its intricate gears are a haunting question. What other advancements were erased in the sudden silence of fallen empires? This tangible connection to the past forces an urgent reflection on our own role as custodians of culture. What are we doing today to ensure that the digital artifacts of our civilization, our data, our creations, are not lost to a future dark age? The stories these objects tell are not just about endings, they are a plea from the past to remember, to learn, and to preserve. Engaging with this history, however, brings with it a profound responsibility, an ethical dimension we cannot ignore. The artifacts of a fallen civilization are more than objects, they are the echoes of real human lives. This truth carries a profound ethical weight for anyone who studies these collapses. A responsibility to handle these stories with both scientific rigor and deep respect for the descendant communities who still feel a connection to that past. The drive to uncover what happened must be balanced by a commitment to avoid sensationalism, to move beyond the simplistic tales of savagery or curses that so often dominate popular imagination. Every interpretation is filtered through the lens of our own cultural biases, a challenge that scholars like Lynn Meskel confront directly, advocating for a more self-aware and collaborative archaeology. This is not merely an academic exercise, it is about justice and representation. When studying the dispersal of the ancestral pueblones from places like Mesa Verde, for instance, the most meaningful insights now come from partnerships with modern Pueblo peoples. whose oral histories and cultural knowledge provide a vital, living context that the silent ruins alone cannot offer. Their perspective transforms a story of mysterious abandonment into a nuanced narrative of migration and adaptation. This collaborative approach ensures that research does not exploit or misrepresent, but instead helps to reclaim and preserve a cultural heritage. The ultimate goal is to balance our academic curiosity with the potential for these ancient crises to inform modern crisis management, without reducing past societies to mere cautionary tales. How do we extract lessons about resource management or social cohesion without projecting our own modern anxieties onto the past? The ethical study of collapse requires a humble recognition that these were complex, flourishing cultures, not just failures waiting to happen. It pushes us to use historical narratives not to predict our doom, but to promote understanding and resilience, asking how this knowledge can foster healing rather than just fear. This careful, respectful engagement with the past inevitably shapes how these monumental events are remembered, and in our modern world, that remembrance is powerfully filtered through the captivating and often distorting lens of popular culture. The story of a fallen empire rarely ends with its last breath. It often finds a second life in our collective imagination, reborn as a powerful myth. Legends like the sunken city of Atlantis or the world-ending battle of Ragnarok are more than just fables. They are cultural echoes of real, searing memories. These myths transform the chaos of historical collapse into structured, moral narratives where cosmic forces or human folly lead to a definitive end. Folklorist Joseph Campbell identified these patterns as universal archetypes, stories of destruction and rebirth that resonate deeply across different cultures because they speak to a fundamental human anxiety about the fragility of our own world. This myth-making impulse continues today, but its primary medium is no longer the campfire tale. It is the movie screen and the video game. Films like Apocalypto immerse us in the visceral terror of a civilization's final days, while strategy games like Civilization let us play at building empires and surviving their potential downfalls. These modern myths are a double-edged sword. They can simplify and distort, turning complex historical processes into stories with clear villains and heroes. Yet, they also perform a vital function. They keep the memory of these collapses alive and accessible, sparking a public curiosity that pure academic texts rarely can. The very act of engaging with these stories, even in an entertaining form, encourages us to ask what we would do differently. Could we be wiser rulers? Could we spot the warning signs they missed? This popular engagement often leads to a deeper question: how much truth is buried within the legend? Many scholars suggest that myths often encode real, cataclysmic events, preserved through oral tradition. Widespread flood stories found in everything from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Book of Genesis may very well be distant, amplified memories of rapid sea level rise at the end of the last ice age, a genuine global upheaval experienced by countless coastal communities. These narratives served as both a record of a traumatic event and a warning for future generations. So how does this cultural reframing shape our perception of risk today? When we consume these stories, we are not just being entertained, we are subconsciously rehearsing for catastrophe. We are exploring scenarios of social breakdown and environmental disaster from the safety of our living rooms. This can be a powerful tool for building awareness, but it can also lead to desensitization or a sense of fatalism, where collapse is seen as an inevitable, dramatic event from a movie rather than a slow creep of vulnerabilities in our own systems. The very myths that keep history alive challenge us to separate romanticized fiction from sobering fact. a crucial skill as we face a world whose interconnectedness creates risks far more complex than any ancient civilization could have ever conceived. A single spark can ignite a continent. Our modern world is woven together by threads of trade, travel, and digital communication, creating a tapestry of incredible cooperation and shared progress. Yet this same interconnectedness builds a system where a crisis in one corner of the globe can ripple outward with astonishing speed, turning a local failure into a global emergency. Think of it as a vast network of dominoes where the fall of one can trigger a cascade that topples them all. This is the double-edged sword of globalization. It fosters resilience through shared resources, but it also creates profound dependencies that can fail simultaneously. History offers stark precedents. In the 14th century, the Black Death did not remain a local tragedy. It traveled the bustling trade routes of the Mongol Empire, from the steppes of Asia to the ports of Europe, carried by fleas on rats that stowed away in merchant ships. The very networks that brought silks and spices also delivered a pandemic that wiped out a third of Europe's population. Centuries later, the financial crisis of 2008 demonstrated the same principle in the economic realm. A collapse in the United States housing market, fueled by complex and interconnected financial instruments, rapidly spiraled into a global credit freeze, proving that our economic systems are now so deeply intertwined that a tremor in one market can become an earthquake in all others. Historian Niall Ferguson consistently warns that our complex interdependencies, from international finance to global supply chains and even digital infrastructure, have made modern societies uniquely prone to these systemic failures. The intricate just-in-time delivery systems that stock our stores are marvels of efficiency, but they hold almost no buffer for a major disruption. A drought in one country can spike food prices worldwide. A cyber attack on a major shipping port could paralyze commerce across oceans, and a new pathogen can circle the planet in a matter of days aboard passenger jets. This in-depth analysis points to a critical need for diversification and robust international governance. We cannot simply sever the connections that empower our world, but we can build systems with more backups and fewer single points of failure. How can we create a global community that reaps the rewards of connectivity without becoming hostage to its inherent vulnerabilities? The answer may lie in strengthening local resilience within a cooperative international framework, creating a world that can absorb a shock without shattering. To truly understand the weight of these systemic failures, we must now listen to the voices of those who lived through them, the personal stories from the heart of collapse that transform abstract theories into human experience. A single voice from the past can convey the terror of an era more powerfully than any ruin. While grand historical narratives speak of fallen empires, it is the personal stories of those who lived through the disintegration that reveal the true human cost of collapse. These rare, intimate accounts, etched onto papyrus or carved into stone, pull back the curtain on the daily reality of watching your world vanish. Pliny the Younger's letters to the historian Tacitus provide a visceral, moment-by-moment chronicle of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. He did not write as a detached observer, but as a terrified young man describing the sky turning black, the rain of hot ash, and the desperate cries of those trapped behind him. This was not a historical event to him, it was a personal catastrophe unfolding in real time. Similarly, the Viking sagas, passed down through generations, tell of the Norse colonies in Greenland not as a statistical failure, but as a slow, grinding tragedy of stubbornness and starvation. They recount how the settlers, clinging to their European identity, refused to adopt the successful seal hunting techniques of the Inuit, a decision that ultimately sealed their fate in the deepening cold. These are not stories of faceless masses, but of individuals making impossible choices. Historian Carolyn Steele powerfully argues that these collapses are felt most acutely in the disruption of daily sustenance, the search for food, shelter, and community. When the central authority and its grain shipments vanish, people are forced to reimagine life itself. They migrate in search of safer ground, they innovate with new survival techniques, and they fall back on the most fundamental human bonds. The story of collapse is therefore also a story of astonishing resilience. It is about the small communities that formed in the shadow of fallen Roman villas, pooling their resources and knowledge to survive. It is about the Maya who did not simply vanish, but who moved and adapted, their culture transforming but enduring. How can we draw strength from these stories in our own uncertain times? They teach us that while empires are fragile, the human capacity to adapt, to cooperate, and to rebuild is not. Our own security may not lie in the unshakable strength of our institutions, but in the depth of our communities and our own willingness to change when the old ways no longer serve us. And often, the catalyst for that ultimate test of adaptability arrives not from within society, but from the raw, untamed power of the planet itself. The ground itself can turn against a civilization. A massive earthquake, a volcanic eruption, or a tsunami does not merely damage buildings. It shatters the foundational assumptions of safety and control that an empire is built upon. These natural disasters have repeatedly acted as brutal catalysts for collapse, overwhelming a society's capacity to respond and tearing open every pre-existing weakness. The evidence is written in the layers of the earth. The colossal eruption of the Thera volcano around 1600 BCE, for instance, may have been a death blow to the Minoan civilization on Crete. The cataclysm would have triggered tsunamis that devastated their coastal centers and spewed ash that blotted out the sun, crippling agriculture for years. Centuries later, the 1755 Lisbon earthquake did more than level a city. It shook the very foundations of Enlightenment Europe, challenging the era's optimistic belief in a rational world order and forcing philosophers to grapple with the problem of meaningless suffering. Geologist David Keyes has meticulously connected such events to historical turmoil, arguing that a mysterious, massive volcanic eruption in 536 CE created a global volcanic winter. Ancient texts from Byzantium to China describe the sun dimming for over a year, leading to crop failure, famine, and social unrest that likely accelerated the transformations of the late antique world. The mechanism is a devastating chain reaction. A single disaster does not just destroy infrastructure, it paralyzes the economy by wiping out trade hubs and productive land. This creates food shortages that lead to famine, which in turn weakens the population, making them vulnerable to disease outbreaks. As the state struggles to provide relief, its legitimacy crumbles, often leading to political instability and rebellion. The disaster becomes a multiplier of every latent crisis, pushing a strained society past its breaking point. This historical pattern forces a critical question for our technologically advanced world. How can modern disaster preparedness, with its early warning systems and international aid, mitigate these ancient risks? Our tools are better, but our interconnected systems are also more complex and potentially more fragile. Learning from these past catastrophes is not about predicting the next eruption, but about building societies so resilient that even a direct hit from nature's fury does not mean the end of our story. The recurring theme echoes across the millennia, not as a single cause but as a fatal convergence. When environmental, economic, and social pressures mount in unison, they test the very limits of what a society can bear. The stories of the Bronze Age palaces, the Maya cities, and the Roman Forum are not isolated tragedies. They are variations on a profound and unsettling pattern, a lesson written in the dust of fallen empires. The evidence compels us to look beyond simple explanations, to see how a drought can unravel a trade network, how a migration can expose political decay, and how a loss of faith can hollow out an empire from within. These ancient upheavals teach us that resilience is not about building higher walls, but about fostering adaptable systems. It is about the foresight to recognize our own vulnerabilities, to value sustainability over mere efficiency, and to strengthen the communal bonds that hold us together in a crisis. Let these stories of overnight collapse inspire a deeper appreciation for the delicate framework of our own civilization and a renewed belief in the enduring power of human ingenuity to rebuild from the ashes. If this journey through the echoes of fallen empires has intrigued you, subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries that shape our understanding of the past. Share your thoughts in the comments on which collapse story resonates most deeply with you, and let us continue exploring the vital lessons that history offers for our collective future.